Hi, this video is to cover CISN24 Topic 1, installation upgrade and Hyper-V instruction with some window basics and with some notes. The document that we're going to cover in this video with the hands-on demonstration will be available on campus. So open this document and follow along with the exercise. I'm going to move the document on the side and sign on remotely to the MONSEC network to open up with the images. Double click on the VMware software which already installed and provided to you access. And then you make sure you sign on to the harriet.monsec.edu. Double click that. And again, sign on with your photo name and the password. And make sure the domain is MONSEC. And log in. Once the remote sign-on screen is available, sign on as a student. If it's some other users name show up here, then you will click other users and make sure you sign on as a student with no password, and then click on the right arrow key to go ahead and log in as a student. Once logged in, we are going to run the VMware workstation, and then we're ready to go through some hands-on exercises together with the document. So if you double clicked or just simply right clicked and then say open, then it will open the VMware workstation. This is the main collection of those virtual machines for the rest of our exercise. The objective of the document, the main objective is to provide an overview for some of those window basics, networking basics, and also the Hyper-V, and with some comparison with the container, and also with certain installation notes for the hands-on lab that we will record for the next 2 videos. We will base all of our exercises on the Windows Server 2022, and the textbook, they have the corresponding chapters. The students should read it. For instances, with this current optional textbook, they will have a chapter regarding installation and managing Windows Server chapters for you to study. Now we're going to do the first hands-on. It's a short hands-on to show how to use the PowerShell and also to run the WinVer to find out what OS has been installed into your system. And the second exercise here is to just demonstrate the GUI interface here. The GUI interface using the Windows 2016 to show you the file resources sharing management interface. Is very similar to the 2022 Windows Server. And in a few weeks, we will have a topic come up. 4.2 is NTFS and the share permission rules and labs. And it will discuss and demonstrate the resources sharing and management and the security exercise in detail. And we will be using Windows Server 2022. So this short exercise is just to show you, give you a preview of the file sharing management GUI interface using Windows 2016. We are going to then turn on our virtual machine. In this case, we use Windows 2016 and right-click, and we're going to say power on, and we can start a guest. And we are also going to power on the Windows 2022 UPG. This is the Windows updated, upgraded server from Windows 2016, which we will do the hands-on exercise to show you how to create this image. So now again, we are going to power on and right-click, say start the guest. If it does asking you, do you want to take ownership before it powers on, just answer yes. And then if it asks you, did you copy it or moved it? Answer and choose, I moved it, okay. So now we're going to complete the Windows 2022, the short hands-on on number 1. So therefore, when it's highlighted on Windows 2022, we are going to send a Control Alternate Delete to it. Click on that, and what we will do is we will then sign on as administrator. So if you see the hands here, that means you are not putting the focus on the login password box. So whatever you type in may not work. So you have to make sure that your hand pointer become a vertical bar in here, so you can type in the password. The password is change me. It's listed all the user password, name and password. All of this image has been listed on Canvas. Now this is Server Manager as a default page. We don't need this one for now, so we're going to just reduce it. So let's complete the short hands-on exercise number 1. We can go to Windows 2016 or 2012. The syntax and command is exactly the same. Once we open the command prompt, we can type in WinVer. So you will see this is for Windows Server 2022 and some detailed information there. And we will go with the PowerShell. So you click on the window here, and you will see the Windows PowerShell available in here. Run the Windows PowerShell, and I already type it in, so I can just go ahead and copy it, or you will basically so paste, or you can type it in. If you type in get dash compute something and then a tab, hit the tab key, T-A-B key on your keyboard, it will complete the syntax for you. So after you've done that, you hit enter. Then you will find out, oh, okay, so what's the window version and what's the server product name of the product. So this is the quick short exercise 1. Now we're going to continue on to do the short hands-on exercise 2. So highlight Windows 2016 and let's log in. And again, password is change me. And in here, you have to make sure that you actually put the focus on the password box so that it will take your password input. Now, if you follow the instruction, which I have it listed on my other screen to complete the exercise. In here, we will show you the first flavor is using the Window Explorer to share a folder. We just call it share. So this is the Window File Explorer. And you can go to the C drive and right-click, and we create a new folder, and we call it share. S-H-A-R-E. You can call it any name you like. And we are going to right-click and then look at the property of the share. Now there's a sharing here, there's a security here. In topic 4, we will have detailed discussion and hands-on lab to complete this particular topics. today we're just going to do a quick view. So we just go ahead and click the sharing, and then we can always go with the advanced share. And you can say, I want to share this folder, and the name, you can change it to anything you want, or you just go ahead and say share. And if you click on the permission here, you will see that everyone has some permission, everything. And for this purpose, for this simple demonstration, we can just say, hey, everyone can read it, or everyone has full control. It doesn't matter. Later on, we would fine tune it to tighten the security on that. So if you apply, that means you want to stay in this this interface, GUI interface. If you say okay, then it apply and exit it out. Okay, so in here, we are going to say okay, and then we are going to exit it out of this particular GUI interface settings. And then security-wise, we are not going to change it. We are going to just leave it at default. So let's close it. So for now, we already shared this folder out. Now, how are we going to actually take a look at it? We have a few ways to do it, and I'm going to just follow the instruction on the textbook, on the document. So in here, you can type in NetView 10.10.16. And you will see that, hey, yeah, you do have a share for the particular computer. So it's pretty convenient for that. And then if you go to the Windows File Explorer in here, look at this PC, you will see, hey, I have C drive, and I have some resources in here. You can also, if you take a look at the figures on the document, then it will show you that we actually type it in this PC here. You're going to type in so you're going to type in // or wag 10.10.10.16, and you hit enter, and you can see the share in there. And there isn't anything in the folder yet because we didn't create anything. We can go back there to create something. So we go back to Windows 2016, and then we can go back in here, and you can say, hey, I want to have a new file, new text document. You can call it shared doc. And once you've done that, you go to your Windows 2016, and it will show up in the share folder, of course, because your Windows 2012 is accessing the folder that you created in the 2016. And continue on to page 2. We can also access the share through the Windows Server's computer management. So we go back to the file server manager here, and then under the tools, you have a computer management. Of course, you can always use the command syntax to run the program. And in here, this is your local users and local database. This is a local user in here, a local group, and then here is a local computer. You can actually connect it to another computer, and then you can try 10.10.10.16. And then once it's connected, you can see you are remotely managing that box. So let's take a look at the share information in there. So under the system tool, let's take a look at it. And you will see the share folder here. If you click that, and then if you take a look at the share here, and you can see, oh, it's been shared under that. And you can manage it by looking at the share folder, double click that. You have the share permission, and you have the security. Remember, in the permission here, we actually give everyone the full control rights. So you can actually manage it remotely and using the computer management to actually take a look at the shared information via management there. And of course, there's a session information showing you that, hey, which computer is accessing your boxes in there. let's continue on to page 3 of the document. We're going to go through some window basics and also end it with some Hyper-V discussion, which we will follow up with installation and Hyper-V hands-on exercise at the same week. So to authenticate, then we will log on to either the local domain or the global domain. The local domain, the one that we just showed you, the user and the groups in the computer management there is the local domain. So once we actually add a role to make the computer server become an Active Directory server, then it becomes a global domain. It will centrally store the database that the users can log on from different boxes. Once the user has been joined into the domain, then they can log on using the credential of the user account that's actually reside on the domain controller, which we will cover that in the later topics. So we have to understand there is a two type of different domains. When you log in here in the 2016 or 2022, we are actually logging in as the local domain users. And because of the username are the same, so therefore they actually pass over with some securities. That's why we can see the share by both logging into the local domain of the Windows 2016 and the Windows 2022 in our previous short exercise number 2. And the second bullet we will go through is that we will have 2 weeks to talk about DNS as our topic. And public accessible DNS server, it should be put it into the DMZ, which we will cover what the DMZ is, the demilitarized zone, meaning that it's a separate interface on your firewall device, separated from your internal network. And our regular DNS server, it has to be hosted separately. And most likely it will be in the inside network here. And the topic 6, we will spend 2 weeks to cover the DNS. Now the UNC name, you just seen it because we have tried the 2 backslash for 10.10.10.16. And then either with or without the share name, we can see the share information in there. So those are the so-called universal naming convention. And that we have tried the NetView already. And regarding VLAN, workgroup, or domain and Active Directory, we will have, we just talked about what is a local domain. And when we install server, later on, we have a bullet to tell you that, hey, we should always install it into a workgroup first. And then later on, we can create an Active Directory, create a global domain. Then we can join the local workstation into that domain. Right, and VLAN will be covered under more in under other networking courses of the degree program, the networking and security degree. The next bullet we're going to talk about is the error correcting code memory, which is pretty popular now, almost come default for every server's installation. So it can fix one single bit error without ever even send you a message or error message. But if it unfortunately with 2-bit in your memory has been corrupted, then it couldn't automatically fix it. So next one is the SIP. Well, this is just the one to actually provide if you want to clone it, if you want to deploy an image to other workstations, then you have to kind of make sure that it has the unique security identifier. So it's always a good practice to do sysprep to actually create a unique security identifier before you started to clone the image out. Now, During any installation of the Windows servers, it will be always default to the DHCP. You can always change that to a static one, which we will do that later. Or you can let it finish it and then just manually change it. Now, when we create the server, it's always been created as the work group, and then we can then add a role. A role is a set of the features, a set of it, and designed to provide certain specific functions of a server, such as DNS, such as the distributed file system services or DHCP server services. So those are the role services. And now, under the role services, when we install it, sometimes we'll ask you, do you want to install this feature or that feature? And it's adding a very specific functionality for this particular role that we want to actually add it to the server. So that's the difference between a role and the feature. And again, for good practice, just don't name the username and the machine name the same, even though now Windows already added $sign after the machine name. So it will be still unique, but it's just a good practice not to do that. Name the machine name and the username identical, create a user into the machine using the machine name. Now, whether you join the domain work group, as we already mentioned, and we always go into the work group, and then we can create the Active Directory domain later. Now, virtualization support, it comes with the Hyper-V as a role, and we will, in the next exercise, to install the Hyper-V and host another image inside it. So Hyper-V is a virtual runtime environment that actually run on a single operating system here, the kernel, and then you will emulate operating system for the underlying hardware. So this is there is a very good container versus VM under the document provided by VMware. So I suggest you read details by clicking this link. And the container, it doesn't use a hypervisor. That's the main difference. And including all the code and dependencies into the container. And it's more modular, it's smaller. And you will see in the next figures. So VM, you will use the hypervisor. It has the whole complete guest operating system, the whole thing in there. And it also has a copy of a virtual copy of the hardware that the operating system will require to run any applications. So if you look at this link, if you click on the link, you will see this more details of the discussion of those graphics. This figure, I think it did a very good job of comparing the virtualization of Hyper-V and the container deployment. So for the traditional, it's the hardware layer, and then you load a Windows operating system and you run the application on top. And now when we virtualize it, then under the virtualization, under the operating system, we actually have the hypervisor layer in here, and then we load a complete, we load a virtual machine, and the virtual machine will have complete operating system. And then the operating system will have the whole binary, all the library in there to run the applications. So this is a complete installation. Usually it's pretty huge in size, about 4 gig or 5 gig for that. And then we will install one of these Hyper-V machine inside a virtualized machine. So we're virtualizing a virtual machine in there. We're actually using VMware virtualization to host Windows 2022, and then run a Windows 2022 to install the Hyper-V and install another copy of the Windows 2022 in our exercise. And the other new flavor, or not a new flavor now, is a popular flavor, is the container that come after the Hyper-V, of course, is that then instead of duplicating all the operating system there, then we just go ahead and load the container runtime on top. And then for any machine that actually has the same container interface loaded, it will then have all the binary and library that's needed for the application to run, then the container will be communicating with the host, and it make the whole size of the container deployment much slimmer than the Hyper-V. Okay. Now, the next topic we're going to talk about is the account with the blind password. It will not work over the network just for security reasons. So if you create a user with no password, don't expect that the share will work. It will not work. You can remotely sign on. So a password is mandatory. And also, it probably have to meet the minimum security for password. We want to actually synchronize the station time with the domain controller. If it's out of sync, then you may or may not be able to log in. Okay, most likely you won't. So it's important that you get the time. Your DC synchronized into the atomic clock, and then your station sync up with your DC, the domain controller. We will talk about that during our other exercises. So later on, we will know that in the Active Directory, we have a computer account, we have a user account, which is the object, and we will create the computer policy and the user policy. And of course, the local computer also have local computer policy and a local user policy, same as the domain one. So the computer account policy, it will respond to your policy setting when you sign on during your reboot. So if you wanted to manage your boxes using the computer policy, then you make sure that you restarted it. Okay. And we will have exercise go through the detail of the user policy and the computer policy. And if we wanted to, we will also go through the account operators to delegate the control for the account operator. We don't want to have user always log in as administrators to manage the department or sub-department's work. So we will create users, delegated control for the users to actually create computer, manage user account, and join the domain, and so on and so forth. We will have exercise for that later. After configuring a server, it was a good practice to try to reboot it. So this summarizes the instruction document before our topic 1 labs.